So there's a lot of discussion these days around what's happening in the U.S. commercial aviation industry. Everything from should the federal government suspend the ticket and excise tax in order to help airlines deal with the rising cost of jet fuel? Should the government invest in Spirit Airlines to prevent them from liquidation? Should the combination proposed potentially by United to merge with American, should we approve that or not? These are all fair questions. We would argue, however, that they are not the right first question to ask. And so, wanted to go through today quickly what we think those questions really are with some context first. As people who follow us know, US commercial aviation has been shrinking versus GDP for some time, going back to 1993. And that's primarily because of long term geopolitical and demographic trends that are pressuring them basically to shrink. Um, and then at the same time, you're looking at an industry that typically doesn't make a lot of money. Going back to 1990, basically almost every penny the industry made before COVID was made with capacity discipline in the years between the global financial crisis and the onset of COVID, about $143 billion out of 163 billion operating income. And then they lost 40% of it in 2 years. And they've since regained most, but not all, despite the fact that they invest a lot of money, capital side, and operating the airlines. And so they are still well behind where they need to be um, in terms of making a return to their shareholders. And in fact, that's reflected in what's happened to airline stock performance since late 2019, December 31st, 2019. Airline stocks on average have underperformed the S&P 500 by 160 percentage points. The S&P 500, as of about an hour and a half ago, was up 120% versus the close on December 31st, 2019. Two airlines, United and Delta, are up 19 and 11% each. Every other airline is trailing in terms of losing money, and the airline index average is a minus 40. So a 160 percentage point difference between the S&P 500 and airline stocks tells us that the market says airlines have too much capacity for the amount of profitable demand that there is. And that means that if airlines are going to be stronger financially, and attract new investment, which is essential to their long-term success. They're either going to have to do one of two things: either find a way to stimulate more profitable demand, and in the context of what's happening geopolitically and demographically, we don't think that's possible, or they're going to have to wring system seats out of the system, either voluntarily through mergers and acquisitions or involuntarily through liquidation. And these are the pressures that are hitting the industry. And these are long-term trends. They're not new, and they're causing the industry to want to shrink relative to GDP versus what it was historically. Demographic trends, cost pressures, supply chain uncertainty, and demand realignment. All of those things are happening. And then you have short-term pressures like what's happening in the Persian Gulf right now, only just exacerbates things. And all these things are meaning that the industry is shifting from a U.S. perspective to one that looked like this, where most of our international travel and trade were over the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, to one that is evolving into this, where basically the U.S. aviation industry and trade as well will be much more focused on intra-Americas, and the industry is adapting to, to focus on that. This U.S. aviation policy hasn't kept pace. It's still stuck in 1978 or maybe 1993, and our contention is that federal policy needs to evolve. And that first we need to understand what it is we want the industry to do before we can regulate it properly. Um, in a country as large and as diverse as ours, commercial aviation is essential to the way that the republic functions. Trains, Zoom, phone calls, email can only do so much. Face to face interaction is going to be essential to a functioning republic as large and diverse as ours because of the face to face interaction that it facilitates, and there's no other way around it. And in order to get that, we need a healthy industry that can withstand shocks and that can innovate and adapt to things as they happen, either from existing competitors or new ones. And frankly, right now, the airlines that we have are the airlines we're going to have because it's so difficult in the regulatory environment that we have for airlines to make money that no one in his right mind would capitalize a new airline. That's not a good thing. So we need to prioritize that financially healthy industry and then regulate within the context of what it is that we want that will most likely produce that healthy industry. And that really means then two things immediately for airlines rather than below that. First, industry consolidation is something that we really probably can't prevent. It will happen either managed voluntarily or it will happen involuntarily through liquidations and bankruptcies. So we should optimize that outcome instead of trying to prevent it. But since that will lead to fewer airlines flying a larger percentage of seats, we want to offset the oligarchic effects of that. And that means we need to have a regulatory policy that encourages capital investment and innovation to offset that oligarchic trend. The most recent innovative airline of any kind, really, that was formed that broke the mold of what other airlines are doing, really was JSX a decade ago. And yet, the federal government just a few years ago hamstrung JSX by forcing them to start to operate like a Part 121 carrier instead of the Part 135 model that they were pursuing, and that will make it more difficult for customers who were shut out of the aviation system by 121 carriers to access that system, and make it more difficult for people to justify capitalizing new ventures because of federal policy that basically discourages it. So those things go hand in hand. And then finally, airports play a role in this too, obviously, and they're under threat. Not every airport that has service today will still have service in the not too distant future. And even the ones that have it will be a lot of them under pressure and will lose relative to what they had before as airlines are under pressure to fly larger airplanes fewer times a day over greater distances. So airports need more freedom also to act like businesses, which means to innovate, to find ways to attract more customers and compete for customers within the context of reasonable regulations and prohibitions because of the federally funded nature of most airports. The specifics of what these policies look like are something that we should debate and discuss. But until we get that right, again, I think we've said before, there's an old saying in the army, if a general gets the objectives right, the lieutenant can write the strategy. Right now, we don't have the objectives right, so there's no way to know what the strategy should be. And therefore, discussions around mergers and acquisitions or other things are sort of missing the point. Let's get the objectives right. Let's figure out what we want, what role we want commercial aviation to play in this country, what best helps the healthiness of our republic, and then let's pursue policies that achieve that result. And then some of the other questions will sort of tend to solve themselves. That's the way we look at it. Love to know what you think. Thanks for tuning in.